Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced by North Idaho College located on Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guests.
I am very pleased to welcome you to a 2-week series with our guest, Doug Dugdale, who is a financial advisor and now I can say an author. Brad Dugdale has written a book that I have with me called Let's Save America, 9 Lessons to Financial Success. And to our viewers, I'd like to show you this book, and we're going to be talking about why our guest wrote this book and a lot of good lessons in this for you, particularly young people, and we hope a lot of young people are watching the program, or if you have children or grandchildren, you might like to refer them to this book or recommend it. Brad, you've been a friend a long time. Thank you for taking time out to be with us on this 2-week series.
Well, thank you, Tony. This is exciting.
Well, I've read your book, and it really is got an interesting message that could be very helpful to future generations in particular. And as always, I'm very pleased to have 2 regular panelists, Janell Burke, who's an attorney in the state of Idaho, and next to her is Steve Schenck, who is the Vice President of College Relations and Development at North Idaho College. And I particularly want to thank Steve for being here today because he's got a very serious throat problem, and Janell, he's also continuing to be brave and be with us under those conditions. At this time, we'll ask Janell to commence today's questioning.
Mm-hmm. Brad, it's exciting to have you here and to talk about your book. I've had the pleasure also of looking at your book and reading it. When you say, let's save America, it sounds like it's going to be a political message, but actually it's a financial message. How did you decide to write this book?
Well, you know, Janell, this all stems back to where I was taking a finance class when I was a junior in college. And a professor asked us to calculate what it took to accumulate $1 million. And we had a brand new calculator back then, an HP 12C. And so we started plugging in different numbers, and I found that $85 multiplied by 12% rate of return multiplied by time was $1 million. And when I first saw that, I said, $85 a month. I mean, I couldn't believe that little amount of capital could produce $1 million. In fact, I questioned it so much I took someone else's calculator to make sure that mine wasn't broken. And so that formula and that one calculation has imprinted in my mind, and I'm kind of it mystifies me why more people don't understand that simple little formula.
So it's the magic of compounding.
Yeah, exactly. It's the magic of compounding.
And you want to share that with other people and have young people particularly, because time will make a difference.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I believe the simple formula, which Albert Einstein called the greatest invention he had ever seen, directed me into my industry. I mean, I'm in the financial planning industry. I've been in it for almost 19 years. And I've been a student of human, I guess, how people engage in this financial process. And it's been interesting to me that you think everyone's participating, and they're not. Only about 5% of Americans are retiring financially independent. And that's just not enough.
Steve Schenck, and as I introduce Steve, I want to say he has a preface to your book, and Steve, it was really well written.
Well, thank you very much, Tony. It was a pleasure to work with Brad just a little bit on this book, and I believe in it strongly too. I apologize for my voice. Brad, this is really kind of a personal mission with you, and you. I've known you for years. Also, we've worked together closely on a variety of things. Let's talk a little bit about some of the personal motivations, some of the applications you have practiced yourself that you're trying to get across in the book.
Yeah, well, thanks, Steve. You know, interesting enough, when you read this book, I guess I'm proud to admit that I've followed every one of these principles, okay? And over this 20-year period of time, I've experienced a lot of the abundance that these principles teach. And, you know, I'm fortunate that I learned this concept early, and I'm 42 years of age. And now I'm sitting there not so much concentrating on myself, but saying, now wait a second, what kind of society do we want to experience 20 years from now? All right? And I personally believe, we talk a little bit about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I personally believe that if we get more and more people to embrace this greatest wealth accumulation process that's been created in the world, we get people following these simple rules, that 20 years from now, you know, the communities that we live in, the country that we live in, will be significantly different than it is today. So to me, this is more of an economic revolution versus just follow these simple steps. I personally believe that like-minded individuals, when we team up together and get a vision, can make a huge difference in what kind of society we have 20 years from now. And that's exciting.
And hence, Janell, there's the double meaning behind Brad's title here. It's a call to individual saving, but it's also a message that with enough savers, America can be a better place. And it's not just about money, but we'll get to that later. Can you tell us a little bit about the foundation that you've established along with this book, and how you're using it yourself, the book, I mean?
Yeah. Well, the goal of this book is actually to go out and fund a foundation. And the foundation's primary goal is to produce materials and information and strategies that we can take these principles and teach to our youth. This morning, I spoke to 2 high school classes, all right? And I sat there in these DECA classes and was explaining to these kids the miracle of compound interest using the Rule of 72. And primarily, I think, if we want to affect change, what we really need to do is we need to integrate this to our youth, all right? So the foundation's purpose is to, 1, raise some money for the foundation, but number 2, start a campaign to where we start integrating these simple principles as the basic foundation of education for all of our students. Because I'm confident that in this country, if this miracle is explained to enough people, people are intelligent, they're going to follow the principles. Now, not everybody, but more and more people, we can create a mindset of change as more and more people understand this simple concept.
And of course, the concept Brad's talking about is the time value of money, or compound interest, and I'm sure we'll get into that more later. Is this a new thing, Brad? Was it discovered about the time you were a glowing college freshman, or has it been around a long time?
Well, you know, actually, Steve, compound interest has been around for centuries. I mean, thousands of centuries. You can go back into biblical times and learn about compound interest. But, you know, there is something different that's happened. You know, this country, you know, if you were trying to accumulate wealth 100 years ago, okay, or 150 years ago, you had to take substantial risk. You had to go out there and create a business. You had to go out and do something. You know, you go back and think about the land grab. You know, when this country went out and said, guess what, you can go out and homestead and have 160 or 320 acres, it was the first time that people could actually end up with something significant, okay? And no wonder people took their families across the United States and staked their claim. You know, you had to take a lot of risk. Now, $25 a month or $50 a month can literally change your life. You know, $85 a month times 12% will accumulate to $1 million. And you know what's happened is that we've created this vehicle over the last 40, 50 years. The financial service industry has created this opportunity. We just have not educated people how to participate. And that's what this campaign's all about.
Thank you.
Brad, we've been doing this show into our 29th year, and I can just hear Mary say to John at home, your guest has talked about the Rule of 72. What in the world is he talking about? And I'm not going to leave them in suspense any longer. So would you share, as you did with those students today, what you mean by the Rule of 72?
Yeah, Tony, the Rule of 72 is used in the financial planning industry, okay? And you take your number 72, you take the interest rate that you would earn, and you divide it into 72 to figure out how long it takes your money to double in value. Let's take a couple examples. If you earn 3% in a savings account and you divide 3% into 72, the number's 24. So that would mean if we put $1,000 in there, it would take 24 years at a 3% rate to double to $2,000. Now, if we took a rate of return, say, of 6%, where you could earn in government bonds, and took 6%, divided that into 72, now it would take 12 years to double money. So that same $1,000 in 12 years would then go to $2,000. And then if we took that same number and we said, all right, there's been mutual funds around that, since 1928 have averaged 12 to 13%, and you take that 12%, divide it into 72, now that it only takes 6 years for that same $1,000 to double. So as financial planners, depending on the goal and the length of time someone can commit capital, would determine which choice would be better for them. But the numbers get really interesting with the rule of 72. We were explaining that with the kids today. You take $1,000, okay, and you put it in at 3 or 4%. I mean, at a 36-year period of time, it grows to $4,000. But you take that same $1,000 at 12% for 36 years, it grows 64 times, or to $64,000. And that's part of the miracle of compound interest.
And you're not going to reach that in a short period of time if you put it in on a savings account at 3% or even a CD. In other words, it requires some investment and some more risk. But I know we'll get to that later, but in your book, the longer you can keep it there, then the less the risk is. But I want to go back just a little bit before I go back to the panel. Another thing you did in the book that's very sobering, I guess I would say, the baby boomers in particular who are going to be retiring in the next 8 to 10 years, 7 years, have used the plastic card. And would you share with us some graphs that you have in the book about your concern of what that means for retirement, both for the individual and for this country, because not as many people as we think are participating in this formula that you're talking about?
Yeah, well, Tony, that's very interesting. I'll share a couple ideas with you. There's a little chapter in there I call reverse compounding, and we'll find that banking institutions and credit card companies get to use that same formula. And for many people, they could be paying very high interest rates, all right, which actually is a form of financial servitude. Let's take here's a statistic I read in the paper the other day. In 1990, the average family had $2,900 in credit card debt. 10 years later, now the average family has over $7,500 in credit card debt. Now, let's play with that for a second. $7,500, if you're paying a 20% interest rate on a credit card, that means that there's $1,500 a year in interest. If they were taking that same $1,500 and plugging it back into the formula at 12%, they could retire financially independent. In fact, many of them would replace their lifetime income. But it's interesting that number has tripled over that 10-year period of time. Okay, so what happens is that these people end up not having as many choices. This morning when I was talking to the kids, I said this isn't perfect, but it's kind of a rule of thumb. You walk in there and you buy an item for $100 on a credit card, okay? And if you only make the minimum payment, all right, it's going to take you several years to pay that off. But the numbers work out that you could multiply that by 3, meaning that $100, okay, was the initial cost, but you're actually going to pay $300 because you'll pay $200 in interest. And then I asked the kids, I said, how many of you would walk on the shelf and buy that thing for $300? Oh, I'd never do that. But that's what many people are doing with credit cards every day. They're going to pay 3 times because all they're doing is making the minimum payments.
They're doing 2 things, too. If they keep doing that till their retirement, at retirement they're in debt, and then they're sitting there maybe with only Social Security, and in their lifetime never get out of debt.
Well, in fact, Tony, interesting enough, since 1982, over 20 million families have declared bankruptcy. And in fact, It's estimated about 1.4 million families will declare bankruptcy even this year. And here we are in the greatest economic expansion that we've ever experienced, and we've got record levels of families declaring bankruptcy. You know, we might even ask, well, why does that happen? And there's been a real shift from savings to debt. And then there's been another interesting phenomena, and I'm not trying to blame this on any particular thing, because this is a great country and we all have a choice to make. But it's now estimated, you know, if you go back in 1959, we had this new consumer appliance, which everyone's going to be watching this show on, called a television set. And as those things peppered themselves across the United States, there's an interesting correlation between the distribution of television sets going up and expanding to 98% of the homes and the savings rate. All right? And it's estimated now that the average child sees 3,000 to 4,000 television commercials a month.
But not on this program.
Not on this program. That's a very nice thing about that. And that a child could actually see 700,000 television commercials by age 18. Mm-hmm. Now, how many of those really encourage people to save money? Mm-hmm. Not very many.
Thank you. Janell Burke.
We talked a little bit about the fact that this is not a new idea, and we just briefly touched on it. But can you tell us about Benjamin Franklin and his view of what he thought could happen with some money?
Well, I sure can. Actually, our forefathers, I mean, there's a lot of great lessons out there. I mean, and I got to tell you that if I could mentor anybody, I mean, Benjamin Franklin would be at the top of my list. When Benjamin Franklin passed on, he left $5,000 to the city of Philadelphia. And he said, guess what? I don't want you to touch this for 100 years. So he wanted everyone to see the miracle of compound interest. Now, 100 years later, they took out about $322,000. They built a school, and then the trustees left it in for another 100 years, and that $5,000 grew to over $5 million. Now, interesting enough, back when Ben Franklin was trying to compound this money, he had trouble because there wasn't rate of return. I mean, the trustees were keeping these things in savings accounts that were paying 1 and 1.5%. You can see that the multiplier isn't very large. But if you start using the rule of 72 and you compound it out for 102 years, the multiplier is phenomenal. It multiplies 131,072 times. That means if you put $1,000 or you put $100,000 in for a community, it would actually grow to over $13 billion. That's huge.
Now I'm going to ask you to compare a community in which they save with a community in which they spend.
Well,
or not spend necessarily, but just don't save.
You know, if you can't tell already, I mean, I'm enthralled by compound interest, and I think there's a lot of things that we can do to affect change. We don't have to change a lot of laws. We don't have to do anything unique. We just have to change the way we think and act. One of the concepts that I was sharing with a local chamber of commerce, in fact, I spoke at their annual banquet a couple of weeks ago, and I said, let's think that we have community A, okay? And community A just does the status quo. And then we have community B, and community B starts an educational program with their youth, all right, where they teach 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th, and 12th, the miracle of compound interest, have them actually fill out a financial plan before you can move on to the next grade. And then we encourage people to start saving 5% of their income, all right? So what if the Chamber of Commerce, for example, said, we'd like to encourage businesses to give each employee the opportunity to save 5% of their income. Now, if we took those two strategies and we compared those two communities 20 years later, what community would you rather live in? You know, if people are embracing this concept over the next 20 years, I mean, the philanthropy alone, the financial abundance that could be created over that 20-year period is fantastic. It's huge.
Steve Sheen.
Brad, some people, excuse me, some people would suggest that this is a pie in the sky kind of thing, that how in the world are you ever going to get a message like this out to enough people to make a difference? How would you respond to that?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. At the end of the book, talk a little bit about an organization, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Mm-hmm. And, you think about that, and it was interesting. The reason I think about that group is about a year ago, I read this little quote, and I said, drunk driving deaths are at a 17-year low. Well, that's an interesting figure. But if you go back and think about that, 20, 25 years ago, a tragic event happened. Someone was killed by a drunk driver. A single individual said that's not right. And they started to initiate some action and started to, now think about this. If you would have went back 25 years ago when that campaign started, and you would have thought about what we currently did, how we viewed alcohol, how, what the laws look like, the big companies that would fight a program like that, and you would look at that and say, it doesn't have a chance. It just flat doesn't have a chance. Why should we even start? And here we are now, 20 years later, and drunk driving deaths are at a 17-year low. I could also mention this, and just an absolute beautiful phenomena. I believe it was in 1999, the U.S. women's soccer team were in the World Cup. I mean, do you know how big it is to win the World Cup? I mean, it's absolutely huge. Now, did that happen overnight? Or did a group of parents 20 years ago, 25 years ago, started integrating soccer into the school systems and club soccer, and the result is, after 20 years of constant building of the soccer program, we win the World Cup. Wow. So I personally believe that if right-minded individuals start getting this information in the school systems, guess what can happen 20 years from now, Steve? We can get a lot of people embracing the miracle of compound interest.
I've got to tell you, somebody says it can't be done. Brad Dugdale says it can. I'm going to bet with Brad every time. How did you get this done, given your busy schedule? How in the world did you write a book?
I'll tell you one thing, and I sure want to thank Don Farrell. Don Farrell and I co-authored this, and I want to tell you, Don and I, we met for 14 months. I mean, every week. And we made just a commitment, and we just sat there every day and took a little progress. And I owe a debt of gratitude to Don Farrell just because he held me accountable. We'd have our meetings and we would get this done. And actually, Don and I became very close through this whole process. But it's amazing if you do a little bit every day, what can happen over a period of time.
What's the reaction to the book so far? Talk about the class you spoke with today and other groups.
I think right now, as I say, this campaign is really just getting started. And the reaction is pretty good. I've had the opportunity to speak in front of the Idaho Planning Association and the Chamber of Commerce. I've been speaking to summer camps. In fact, I'll tell you, I think the response is pretty good, but it's a 20-year campaign, Steve. It's one of those things where people are now just getting to sense and feel the information, and we've got a long way to go. We've got a lot of activities that we need to talk about. When you're trying to change a system that took 50 or 100 years to create, you're just not going to change that system overnight. But I'm very encouraged about how this program is getting started right away.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Brad, one of the things that impressed me about the book, too, is not only are you trying to advocate that people become financially secure, but I don't want to leave the audience with the impression that you don't have other interests and concerns in the book, and I was really impressed with that. Would you share a little bit, and we can continue next week if we don't finish, but how to keep this all in perspective for a family or for an individual?
Well, Tony, that's a great question, and thank you for asking it. It's interesting. There's no doubt that money is not the solution. In fact, we see a lot of these dot-com millionaires, and I guess we're seeing less dot-com millionaires day by day. But I would tell you this, that people can sit there and have a lot of abundance and still not be happy. And so balance is very important in this whole process. But the reason that I feel this message is very important, and I spoke to the kids about this morning, the reason why I want you to embrace this early is so you can have more choices. You see, if people start early with their $85 a month, you know, they don't have to go out there and pick a job they don't want. They can pick a job that they love. And if we start teaching our youth, you know, shouldn't the best teachers teach? Shouldn't painters paint? You know, shouldn't we get people embracing, you know, whatever your talent is, if you're following the formula and you're taking care of your financial part, you should be able to choose any vocation you want.
Rather than a vocation because of financial needs.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. You know, and isn't that a society? You know, it's kind of funny with me. You can tell I love what I do. My energy is really high, and I was very lucky. I found a job early in my life that I truly love. Why shouldn't everyone have that opportunity?
Another thing you do, and our viewers may not know this, and because of your financial successes, this can happen too, it also frees you up for time for your children and your spouse, and also you do a tremendous amount of charitable work. And so, and the more secure one becomes, that does free you for that community involvement?
Yeah. Well, you know, I've made some personal changes in my life. One, because I'm going to dedicate to myself to this concept for the next 20 years. But I'll tell you what, spending time with your family is wonderful. And I'll tell you, there's a real message in this book that, you know, the power in life is giving. And the more you give, the more you get back. You know, and you don't know that when you first start in life. You know, you're thinking so much of yourself. But I really think Maslow's right. You know, and as you progress and as you accumulate more abundance, you'll find that there's a unique power out there that the more you give back, the more you get. And it's just not monetary. I mean, you know, it comes back in many, many ways.
Well, you certainly have done that in this community. As we end today's program, I would make note that you had not been here very long when you chaired a committee and we applied for the All-American City Award, and you spent hours and hours on that. We did get that. I think we're still the only city in Idaho that's been an All-American City. And again, we commend you for your work in that, and you've done numerous other things. On behalf of our panel and our staff, Brad Dugdale, thank you for being with us today and discussing your book, Let's Save America, 9 Lessons to Financial Success. And I do want to share with the viewers that have come in late that we'll be back next week with you, and we shall continue to discuss other interesting points of your 9 lessons. And Brad, thanks for being with us today. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Thank you all.
As I've indicated, ladies and gentlemen, we will be back with Brad Dugdale next week on his book, Let's Save America. He's a financial consultant and advisor, and he's written this book based on that knowledge, but also other things that he has learned. And I hope you will be with us when next week we'll do part 2 of his book and the hard work he's done. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running entirely college-produced program on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us again at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station. Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced by North Idaho College located on Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guests.
It is a great pleasure to welcome you back to our program, which commenced last week on a book that we have with us, and the author of that book. Our viewers who were not with us last week, let me share with you that the book is entitled Let's Save America, 9 Lessons to Financial Success. I have a copy of the book. It's authored by Brad Dugdale, who's our guest again this week, as he was last week, and we just got started. We have other things to say about the book, and I also want to point out that Donald Farrell was a co-author, and we want to recognize his great contributions also. Brad, welcome back to the program, and it was so interesting last week to talk about what your book's about and for your advocacy for families, particularly that are young and have years ahead for investment that could become financially secure and not only affects their family but everything else that they can do in society. And welcome back to the program. Thank you for spending 2 weeks with us.
Oh, thank you, Tony. This is a delight. It's an absolute delight.
And as always, I'm pleased to have our 2 regular panelists, Janell Burke, who's an attorney in the state of Idaho, and next to her is Steve Schenck, who is the Vice President of College Relations and Development at North Idaho College. And we particularly want to say to our viewers, we're grateful to Steve Schenck for being here under the physical conditions. He has a bad throat, but the show must go on, as Steve knows. And with that, we will ask Janell to commence today's questioning with Brad Dugdale.
Brad, last week we talked about the miracle of compounding, and of course it is truly a miracle. But today let's start talking a little bit about some of the practical applications of this miracle of compounding. And would you just briefly share with our viewers what the miracle of compounding is and then how to get started on this?
Sure. Well, actually, what I feel is that individuals should first of all take care of themselves. There's a little part in the back I call the ripple effect, okay? And the first part is that you should really make sure that you've embraced the concept. Then once you have personally embraced the concept, what you should do, in my opinion, is share it with someone else, all right? So that starts that ripple going out. And then I think if we make enough ripples out there, we can create, a huge mindset or even a paradigm shift where more people are embracing the concept. But as we talked about last time, it's interesting. It takes as little as $85 a month times 12% times 40 years to accumulate $1 million. And one of the thought process I have is that why shouldn't we all replace our lifetime income so that you can really choose any vocation or any profession that you would really like, and you can do that if you're just saving a little bit along the way. But one of the great ways to get started is that with existing law, Uncle Sam gives everyone a tax-free loan. So you have the opportunity either through an individual IRA account, individual retirement account, or many companies will offer 401ks or 403bs if you work for a government agency or a school or a hospital, something like that. But you've got the ability for many people to save right out of their paychecks. What happens is, for a lot of Americans, if the money goes in your checking account,
it's gone.
Yeah, it's gone. People have more month than they have check, okay? So if you take it out before you can touch it, there's 2 things that happen there. One, out of sight, out of mind. But number 2, tax dollars that you would normally send off to the government, you get to keep in your account, and you get to sit there and let that money earn interest until you take it out. And so one of the principles that we talk about in this book is that everyone should maximize their tax-free loan. If everyone knew that Uncle Sam would give you an interest-free loan for up to 40 years, most of us would say, wow, how can I take advantage of that? And that's one of the best ways to practically take advantage of the miracle of compound interest.
And parents and grandparents can also take care of their families by engaging in educational Roth kinds of IRAs, I think. There's some kind of an educational account that you can form.
Well, interesting enough, the next strategy, and thank you for leading me into that, if you start with yourself, and so you're putting your $85 a month away, all right, you've got a vision of where that's going to go, okay, you then have the opportunity to think about the next generation. We talked a little bit about the rule of 72 and how long it took to double. And if you're investing in the American economy and you're earning 12%, now granted, those rates of return go up and down. The stock market is not a straight line up, which many people are figuring out right now. But if you hold it over periods of time, even $1,000 put in for a grandchild, okay, left into the miracle of compound interest for 60 years, multiplies 1,024 times. So $1,000 would actually grow to $1 million. So what a nice thing for a grandparent to do, write a letter to the grandchild and say, listen, you know what? I cared about you enough that I wanted you to put I put this $1,000 in the account, okay? I don't want you to take it out for 60 years so that you can choose to do whatever you want to do in your life. You know, so not only now have you taken care of yourself with your $85 a month, but you can plant a seed for the next generation and then even encourage that grandchild to do the same thing for their grandchildren. That's another way that we could embrace the concept of compound interest.
Steve Sheen.
Brad, in the richest country in the world, and one of the richest periods we've ever enjoyed, how much do most people save every month?
Well, you know, I guess the easy answer is not enough. I mean, it's estimated, Steve, that right now only 5% of Americans will retire financially independent without some type of an assistance. And in fact, the statistics currently say that many people close to retirement have less than $10,000 saved, and for many of these people, I mean, retirement's only 10 years away. Wow. I mean, guess what? It's really hard to embrace the miracle of compound interest when you only have a 10-year time horizon. So there's a big gap. As we talked a little bit last time, we've got more people embracing debt versus embracing the miracle of compound interest.
One of the great things about the book is that you give people some practical advice on how they can make small changes in their lives to achieve big results. Would you share some of those with us?
Yeah. Well, Benjamin Franklin said that even a small leak can sink a great ship, okay? And so there's a lot of little tiny small leaks that we don't think about. You know, we talk about examples where even a $1.50 a day, all right, you might run out there and buy a pop and a candy bar, okay? And I'm not telling you not to do that because you have a choice of whether you do that or not. But the impact in a 401k could end up being between $100,000 to $300,000, all right, if you put it in that retirement account versus consuming. I mean, you know, if you're smoking a pack of cigarettes a day, I will tell you this: pack of cigarettes a day is financial independence if it's plugged into the formula of compound interest.
And you're still alive to enjoy it.
Yeah, and you still are alive. In fact, you know, this dovetails a little bit into that. Right now there was a survey that 25% of Americans felt the only way they could get wealthy is by winning the lottery. You know, well, that is just an absolute shame. I mean, a lottery is basically a tax on the ignorance.
By the way, I quit smoking 20 years ago. This is not, but anyway, when should people start saving? Or let me rephrase that. Is it ever too late?
Well, as I mentioned, well, one, it's never too late. In fact, I think Tony and I were talking a while ago that life expectancies are getting longer and longer and longer. You know, it used to be that you would retire, and that, in fact, the Social Security system was basically you'd retire and you died, okay? Well, the problem we're having with Social Security right now is people are retiring and living. And I think life expectancies are out there in the 84 to 87 years of age. And so even when someone retires, if they choose to retire at age 60 or 65, they still have 20% of their life left, so which is still a long time to use the miracle of compound interest. As I mentioned last week, I was talking to a group of kids, and here's the difference. If someone earns $25,000 a year, for example, okay, and they wanted to replace their lifetime income, if they start at age 25 and they put the $85 a month away, they'll basically grow that to $1 million, okay? Now, if you take the $25,000 times 40 years, that person will have earned $1 million in their lifetime. So the $85 a month replaces their lifetime income. What the numbers work out to be is you only have to put in $40,000 in principal, leave it in the miracle, and it grows to $1 million. But compound interest is cruel. If you wait 10 years Now you say, well, you know what, I'm not going to start saving at 25. I'm going to wait and save at age 35. You now have to put in $287 a month, $287. And when you multiply that out over the 30-year period, you have to put in $110,000 to get that same million, or it's 296% more to get the same result, okay? If you wait till you're 45, now you need to put in $1,014, or you'll have to put in $243,000 to accumulate $1 million. So you can see that. Would you rather start with $85 and only put $40,000, or would you rather wait 20 years and put in $250,000? You know, that's the difference. And so if we're educating our youth about starting early, guess what? You know, that means if they have $1 million of lifetime income and they only need to put $40,000 to retire, think of all the other choices they have with the extra money.
Excellent, thank you.
That is really powerful, and so I thought this program in particular is directed at our focus is on young people because they have time on their side. As a matter of fact, one of the things that you did in your book that you might give us the formula now is that you have like a mathematical formula which involves principal, interest, and time. Would you share that quickly?
Yeah. Well, you know, as we mentioned last time, you know, this formula is very simple. It's principal or money multiplied by rate of return multiplied by time. I mean, and maybe it's so simple that people just don't embrace the concept, but it's literally that simple. Yeah, it's literally that simple.
Now let's get to the nitty-gritty of encouraging people to discipline themselves. Of your 9 points, or what you call your 9 lessons, one of them is hold yourself responsible by signing a personal contract.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you can take some time now, particularly with young people, say, it's like you did in writing this book, you disciplined yourself for 14 months, and,
yes.
and it's an ongoing process.
Well, you know, I have a lot of enthusiasm. I figure there's financial compounding, you know, principal times rate times time. And the great thing about America is we have a lot of choices. So we also have intellectual compounding. You know, if someone makes themselves, goes to school, you know, there's a big difference between just graduating from high school and even getting 1 year of college or 2 years of college. Your worth in the marketplace goes up quite a bit. So you have the opportunity, if you invest in your education, you have the opportunity to earn more principal, which means you have more choices in your life. But then there's a third part that I talk about called exponential compounding. And exponential compounding is where you mix self-improvement with the formula of compound interest. Now that segment where we talk about, you know, signing a personal contract, you know, Tony, I've just found that there's a real miracle out there that if you get very clear on what you want to accomplish in life and you write it down, it's amazing how many coincidences happen and how things actually get done. I mean, I could give you example after example where I wrote something down and 24 months later, the darn thing happened. Now why does it work that way?
Because you helped make that happen by being disciplined to do the process.
Yeah, I think that's part of the process, but you know, I think it's getting clear. You get real clear on what you want to accomplish. It's amazing what you can get done. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Janell Burke.
I want to follow up on that a little bit because I've talked with you before and you've always said, what are your goals? What are your goals? You're always after me. So tell us, why is it important to write down these goals? I mean, that's along the same line with this discipline, but why is it important to know what your goals are? And I think you have referred to a study that
it's interesting enough, you know, as over a period of time, as I kept reading and accumulating information that I wanted to share in this book, you know, one of the studies that had a big impact on me was an Ivy League study that I think concluded back in 1975, where they took a group of people in 1950 and they asked these students that were graduating from college, you know, how many of them had goals. And about, I think the numbers were that 87% of them had no goals at all. 10% of them had some mental goals, had some idea what they wanted to accomplish, and then 3% had very definitive written goals. They knew exactly what they wanted to do. So 25 years later, they came back and they studied this group of people, and they found that the 87% had what they called kind of average success. They had done okay, all right? The 10% that had a mental vision of where they were going had accumulated more assets than the 87%, but the 3% that had written goals had accumulated more net worth than the other 97% of the classmates. So when I'm always asking people, you know, what kind of goal, what kind of vision do you have? If it's as simple as getting clear and writing something down, meaning that you can really have what you put out there in your vision, why shouldn't you have it?
And so this is kind of a little bit of dreaming that comes true.
Yeah, well, I think dreams do come true.
Now, along that same line, talking about our children and how important is it to think about that long term, what we're going to do for them educationally?
Well, that's a great question. You know, as I said, part of this campaign, and we talked about this a little bit last week, I think that Americans are extremely intelligent and that there's a gap. The reason that we're really writing this book is we're trying to fill that gap, and we're using the Let's Save America Foundation to fill that gap also, in that we could do a better job teaching our youth this formula. You know, here it was for myself. We only spent like an hour and a half in a college level class, a junior level class, on this formula, and then we went off to another problem, okay? If we start teaching this miracle to our kids, kids are intelligent, they'll figure this out. And instead of having 5% retire financially independent, why not have 10, or why not have 15, or why not have 20% of our population embracing this miracle?
And if they have a chance to accumulate, instead of working reverse-wise. And so now I want to give you a chance to talk about how this compounding principle works in reverse.
Yeah, well, and what we talked about before, there is a chapter in here on reverse compounding. And, you know, interesting enough, when I spoke to a group of people the other day, we talked last time a little bit about the average family having $7,500 in credit card debt. When I make my presentations, I ask people, I said, all right, you know, we said the average family has $7,500 in credit card debt. You know, I have 0. How many people in the room have 0? Well, you know, only about 20% of the hands go up. Now, the word average is kind of weird. That means that if I have 0 and maybe you have 0 and you have 0, that means there's families out there that have $12,000 and $15,000 and $20,000 in credit card debt. Mm-hmm. Wow. All right. Now, realistically, they're in a hole. And how are they going to get out of that hole? And so, you know, we need to teach people not to get into that hole. Those kind of industries, the credit card industry, and there again, the credit card's a tool, okay? I'm not condemning credit cards, because if they're used properly, credit cards work perfectly fine. You know, I buy things on credit, I pay it off at the end of the month. It was a great service for me. But if you get into MPS, or minimum payment syndrome, you really are a financial slave, and you're working for other financial institutions instead of working for yourself.
Steve Sheen.
Brad, we talked about goals, and I know you've got more of them. Did you whisper something to me before the show about a summer camp?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I did, Steve. You know, I had a fun experience. This summer I was able to talk to some kids that were 6 to 10 years of age, okay? And I said, how do I teach 6 to 10-year-olds, you know, the concept of compound interest? And so when I sat down there cross-legged between these kids, and I said, how many kids have ever planted a garden? And, you know, most of the kids had raised their hand. I said, well, you know, what'd you plant? And some kids had planted corn and pine trees and flowers and et cetera, et cetera. And this is how intelligent kids are. I said, well, what happens if you don't plant a seed? And they all look at me like, well, you idiot, you don't get a plant if you don't plant a seed. I said, well, you know, isn't that make sense? So if you do plant something, you get a plant. If you don't plant, you don't get anything. You know, I said, well, what would happen if your grandparents had planted a pine tree for you, you know, or when they were born. And they said, oh my gosh, it'd be really, really tall. Well, what happens if they hadn't planted anything? Oh, they wouldn't have a tree, okay? Now, it's interesting, and then I explained to them, I said, what do? I says, well, I help people plant money. And this little girl looked at me and says, oh, you plant money trees. Now, you know, the important part here is that, remember, you know, we don't have enough Americans planting any seeds, you know, and we teach this to these kids, and these kids know exactly what's going to happen. But you see, the kids already understand the first part of the miracle of compound interest is you got to take some action.
Brad, as you've said repeatedly, this is a simple concept. It's been around for centuries, and yet so few people practice it. Why do you think that is?
Well, I really think that not enough people practice because we have not done a good job of explaining the concept. You know, as I mentioned before, in the last program, you used to have to take a lot of risk, and now literally $25 a month can change your life. And so, you know, America, we take so many things for granted. We have created a wealth accumulation process that isn't anywhere in the world, isn't anywhere. The average citizen, I mean, I even go back to remember the book, The Tree Grows in Brooklyn? Mm-hmm. And she was trying to do anything to own a piece of land. She knew if she owned a piece of land that she could be successful and help her family move to the next level. You know what? You don't need to own a piece of land. You just need to save $25 a month or $50 a month, and you got that piece of land. You've got that piece of security. And who's telling that message?
No one, especially compared to the credit card company advertising. And I don't mean to criticize them either, but let's talk about something you and I have discussed many times before. You were in classrooms last week talking to students. The concept was foreign to them, I expect. I mean, they haven't heard a lot about compound interest.
For many, the first time.
And yet they probably have heard a great deal about credit cards and buying on credit. It does seem a shame that we can't find a way to teach people these lessons before they make what ought to be an informed, intelligent choice about how they spend their money. Can you talk a little bit more about consumption and some of the habits people get in, not just credit cards, but other traps they fall into?
Well, I would mention this now, and this is interesting. You know, credit card companies are soliciting our youth. I asked last week, how many kids had credit cards. Now, there were about 30 kids in this class, maybe 25. And over 20% of them already had credit cards, 20%. I asked how many are getting solicitations in the mail. They all raised their hands. They're all already juniors and seniors in high school, and they're already getting the solicitations in the mail. And for some of these kids, you know, they think this is a badge of honor that, you know, now I'm an adult, you know, I have this vehicle. You know, the other way that some of these kids are ending up with this is they may go to a particular store, and when they go to check out, someone asks them, well, would you like a 25% discount on that product? We'll just fill out this little application and we'll let you save 25%, and you get the little bill back in the mail, and they say, well, instead of paying back the $100, you only have to send in $15. Wow. Well, this is kind of neat. Isn't this great in America? You get a 25% discount and you only have to pay in $15, and wow, it says I can charge up to $500. This is a great country. Those are some of the traps or some of the ways that people start embracing debt before we've even had a chance to tell them about the miracle of compound interest.
No money down, no payment for 6 months. Yeah, it goes on and on and on. Thank you very much.
I don't care to be as generous as Steve is. Steve is being kind. I think a lot of these companies are very intentionally creating an atmosphere in which what you just described puts people at a very young age in a situation for the rest of their life. As a matter of fact, there are some companies they're not very happy with you if you pay your credit card off each month. And in fact, they have terms for we people who do. I think they call us deadbeats at times. But that is one part of the problem. I want to do two things. First of all, I want to let the viewers know how they can get in touch on your website, if I may. And it's www.letssaveamerica.com. I know that they would like to pursue further, and of course the book is available, and of course through that you're available to talk with groups. But along the line that Steve was addressing, I interview and survey students at the college level, and the great majority of them have not heard of this concept either. So would you take a little time, we don't have a lot left, but shall we not look at incorporation into curricula, this kind of concept? It's not taught in the schools, or very many, is my understanding.
Yeah, well, Tony, I couldn't agree with you more, you know, and in fact, I personally believe, as part of this economic revolution that we're starting, that's one of the solutions going out there, and that's one of the things the foundation is going to pursue, is how can we make this regular curriculum. You know, we do a good job of education, all right, but we're just educating people to go into the workforce, all right? Why not educate them and give them tools of practical application so that truly we end up with a product, you know, we end up with a worker that had all the choices that they wanted to have in their lives. So I think you're onto something. I mean, that's one of the strategies that we want to pursue.
I want to commend you because it reminds me again, last week we talked about the MAD organization that Mother started, one lady started, and look what that's done to reduce accidents and DUIs and deaths on the highway. With this program, you could turn a lot of people around so that when they get to retirement, they are not dependent just on Social Security, or actually create a burden for the budgetary process of the nation. And so I think that's another reference to your title in your book. And on behalf of our panel, Steve Shink and Janell Burke, and our staff, Brad Dugdale, we thank you for being with us and discussing your book, Let's Save America, 9 Lessons to Financial Success. It's been a pleasure to have you here both weeks, and as we're all friends of yours, we know how generous you are with your time, and we thank you, and we are sure our viewers have received a lot of very valuable information, and congratulations on the publication of your book.
Well, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, our guest has been Brad Dugdale, who is the author of Let's Save America, 9 Lessons to Financial Success, along with Donald Farrell. I hope you've enjoyed our program. I'm sure you have, and I'd like to invite you to be with us again next week at this same time when we shall discuss yet another issue. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running entirely college-produced program on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us again at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.